Hi, everyone. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. Thank you so very much for joining us. We have really interesting things to talk about today. New laws could be in place within days, which would dramatically alter the private union landscape in the entire state of Wisconsin. We will also talk about the tragedy of the growing heroin use in Wisconsin. We will talk about the two teenage girls accused of attempting to murder their friend for the fictional character Slender Man. And we'll talk sports for the last few minutes of the shows. Packers, Brewers, Badgers, Bucks, whatever you want. First, let me introduce everybody. You know longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally. Kevin Fischer, who spent many years here as a broadcast journalist. Same for Denise Callaway, who's now a communications and public relations professional. And you know Gerard Randall, education and employment consultant. Rick Horowitz is going to be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, huge surprises out of Madison Friday when Republican leaders announced that legislators would be called back to Madison, possibly within days, to vote on right-to-work legislation. That's a law which would stop private companies from forcing workers to join the union and pay union dues. And Governor Walker says he would sign the measure if it reaches his desk. Who in a million years ever thought Wisconsin would be a right-to-work state? And now that's a realistic possibility.
It's getting closer. I think the election of Dewey Strobel to the state Senate helped give them a very, very narrow margin. There's still a lot of work being done by lobbyists to pick off two Republicans to kind of thwart the deal. They certainly have the votes over in the Assembly. But I think it's interesting that the movement has been as fast as it's been on this when the governor stated emphatically that he wouldn't sign it, and now that it's gone on a fast track, and the Assembly leadership and the governor's office, they've been communicating regularly around how the bill should look if the governor is going to sign it. So I think that accommodation having been made and the announcement that next week they're going to put it on a fast track, it seems like it's all but done.
Denise, do you think this is progressing exactly like Walker thought it would, or was he being dishonest during the campaign when he said, I'm not pushing for this, we don't want it, it's a distraction?
Well, I don't think he wanted it as a distraction. I think there's a big difference between saying you don't want it as a distraction and meaning that you won't support it if it crosses your desk, which now apparently he's going to do. Now, my problem with right to work is that in every state where you've had right to work, it has shown that it doesn't accomplish what its supporters say that it will. You don't see that wages increase in right-to-work states. That doesn't happen. I think in Wisconsin, we have enough. The issue in Wisconsin, when it comes to job creation, is not based around whether or not people are forced to join unions. That's not what's holding us back in Wisconsin, with the governor trying in his second term to meet the pledge that he had in his first term to create 250,000 jobs. That's not the issue. This, to me, quite frankly, to kind of answer the question you asked Kevin, I never thought Wisconsin would be a right-to-work state. I've always seen Wisconsin as a progressive state, where people had the opportunity to join labor unions and reap their benefits. And now basically what we're saying to folks is, you know what, you can be a little dishonest. You don't have to join the union. You can get all the benefits the union provides, but you don't have to join the union. And I, for some reason, never thought that was the way people in Wisconsin decided that they would decide that they're going to engage in workforce development. So I don't think it's going to do anything. And I think what we're going to find is what we found in other states. Wages are going to, the average wages are going to drop, and we're not going to create any additional jobs, not because of this.
Okay, Kevin, look in the crystal ball. What are we going to see next week?
Or Gerard.
Or Kevin.
Is that me or you? I don't know. I'm not sure.
Look into the crystal ball.
Yes,
Next week, are we going to see the huge demonstrations we saw during Act 10, or now that the public employees have lost those rights, are they not going to be supportive of the private employers?
You'll still have some who have nothing better to do than to show up at the noon hour at the Capitol and bang drums and sing maybe just a little bit better than Rick Horowitz. And there will be picketers and protesters. But I don't think you're going to see the magnitude of what you saw during Act 10 because, quite frankly, that backfired and didn't work. And there's going to be a backlash if they try anything like that again. There'll be lobbying and there'll be a media blitz and so forth. There will be that. But it will be for a lost cause. I mean, this is not only on the fast track, but lots have happened since we last talked about this. All right, the governor this was not a priority for him, and he told the legislature not to make it their priority because he didn't want it to be a distraction. He never said he was against it. He never said he wouldn't sign it. He just said, look, I'd prefer that you not put it right up there at the top of the shelf.
Well, I'm running for president.
Since that has happened, I mean, polls have been taken. There's great support statewide for right-to-work legislation. All right? Let's be clear about that. People want this, and why do so many people approve of this? Because once they figure it out, and once they've been told, it's pretty simple to understand. The only thing right-to-work legislation does or says is that if you don't want to be coerced to belong to a union, and you don't want to have to pay dues for causes that you might find repugnant or repulsive, then you have that personal freedom not to join a union. That's what this is. It's an issue of personal freedom. It's not that there can't be unions or unions are going to disappear. So suddenly, legislators who are not going to sit in their offices on their hands, I mean, they were elected to put forth their views and legislate. They see the public support has grown on this, and they now have the votes. So they're striking while the iron is hot. With Dewey Strobel winning, who ran on a right-to-work campaign, you have at least 17 votes. So the Senate goes in next week. They pass it, goes over to the Assembly where it will pass overwhelmingly, and then we become the 25th state in the union. Even Michigan, the home of the UAW, has right-to-work legislation, and the world has not ended in that state or Iowa or Indiana or any of the others. We'll be just fine, even though opponents are going to, say the sky is falling.
All the headlines are going to say fast-tracked, fast-tracked. Is this going exactly according to plan?
Absolutely, and it's the pattern that we've seen with this dishonest governor and this dishonest legislature. In the governor's first term, before he was elected, he said nothing about destroying public employee unions, and the first thing he did after the election was destroy public employee unions. Before he was elected this time, he said, in fact, he wasn't interested in right to work, and he wouldn't support it, and he wouldn't support it this year. He said all kinds of things, which were also lies, we now know that this governor lies when he campaigns, and as soon as he is elected, he then does the opposite. I hope the nation realizes this, because too many people that should know better are taking this man seriously when he is dishonest and corrupt. Denise said, this isn't going to increase wages. It sure isn't. In fact, right-to-work states we know have lower wages, and that's the only reason to pass right-to-work. It is to weaken unions. Of course, some people, will take all the benefits of unions and not pay their way and be freeloaders and get all the advantages without contributing to the collective bargaining. And this allows people to do that. It bothers me that this blitzkrieg, Kevin claims that there's growing support for right to work. Then why is it they have to rush it through the legislature in a blitzkrieg so that people can't organize opposition to it? And the only reason is that's the way they operate. It's dishonest. It doesn't improve the economy. It destroys the economy, and it lowers wages, and it puts less money in the economy and less money into job creation.
If you don't want to belong to a union, you don't have to.
Next topic. Let's talk about the sad headlines this week that in Milwaukee County now, more people die from heroin use every year than die in traffic crashes. Apparently, people get addicted to prescription drugs, and then they move to heroin because it's easier to get and it's cheap. Only costs about $15 a hit. How in the world do you even begin to fight a problem like this?
Well, one of the more promising things that happened in the last election was the election of the new Attorney General for the state. And he made it a priority of his to fight this heroin problem that we now have that's crossed over into communities that people never thought it would cross over into. Interesting thing, I found out that one of the hot spots for heroin sales is actually right down in the Bronzeville neighborhood. And there have been traffic stops by both the City of Milwaukee Police and the sheriff's office to try to tamp down some of these sales that are occurring literally right under our noses. It's a problem, and it's a problem that has to be addressed. Resources are going to have to be applied to it. I think it's kind of interesting that at the same time we're talking about how do we get our arms around the issue with heroin, and in some of these other communities, they've got issues with drugs that have literally paralyzed their communities. We're talking in this community about decriminalizing or at least lowering the fines for marijuana. People have become disjointed when we are out to try to address a problem that has really taken us by surprise for some, but has taken a lot of young people hostage especially, and in suburban communities where people thought it would never grab hold. And to me, marijuana is a gateway drug.
Denise, you know the next headlines are going to be, this is moving into schools and the victims are going to get younger and younger. How do you stop this problem now? $15 a hit. A 12-year-old kid can afford that.
I think you stop the problem by not simply focusing on enforcement, but heroin is a highly addictive drug. What are we doing to make sure that people who are having problems with heroin have the opportunity to receive appropriate treatment? I mean, that really, at the end of the day, is what's going to stop the epidemic. People having access to treatment. And one of the things we know about these kind of addictions is that it's not sometimes the first time that they're able to beat heroin that they're going to be successful. That this is a drug that has such a strong pull to people that even after they've been clean, they go back to it again. So we need to, as a community, decide that we're going to put the resources into making sure that there's appropriate treatment for folks and that there are prevention measures. How do we begin to have honest conversations with young people about the dangers of these types of narcotics that are so highly addictive?
So many people...
we have to do that both. We have to do that both ways. We have to make sure that we start to talk to kids about the dangers of this, and we have to make sure that we put money into treatment. Putting it solely into enforcement is not going to solve the problem.
So many people argue that the war on drugs has been a failure. This is a huge battle. So how do they approach this one?
By not pursuing the failure of the war on drugs, by doing exactly what Denise said. We know drug addiction is a public health problem. I was actually a little surprised that Gerard started out talking about heroin in the Bronzeville neighborhood, because we know why this is now a big public concern. It is, no one cared when black people were dying of heroin addiction. They only started caring when suburban white kids started dying of heroin addiction. When a daughter of a member of the Republican Party in the legislature was addicted. The legislature this past session did exactly the right thing. Talking about drug treatment for heroin and dealing with it as a public health problem, this whole idea of incarceration and enforcement and get tough and scare people, and you end up doing what we've always done, which is incarcerate a large portion of the black community, and the white community is treated differently. What we need to do is have drug treatment in the black community and drug treatment in the white community for this terrible problem, and pursue it as a public health problem, because that's what it is.
If I may end on a positive note and piggyback.
I believe that was positive.
Piggyback off of what you said. In the last session of the legislature, and God bless them, in a bipartisan fashion, the legislature passed 7 anti-heroin bills signed into law by the governor that will do many of the things that we've talked about here. Put treatment centers in underserved communities. Allow for people to get the treatment that they need. Allow for the drop-off of prescription drugs at all kinds of depositories. So I think, even though that headline in the story was alarming in the Journal-Sentinel, those laws just went into effect middle of last year. Give them a chance to percolate and to work, and maybe we'll see a turnaround because of the action the legislature and the governor took.
All right, next topic, also a sad one. In the next few weeks, a Waukesha judge is expected to decide if the 2 teenage girls who repeatedly stabbed their friend last summer to please the fictional character Slender Man should be tried as adults or as children. If tried as adults and found guilty, they could end up in prison for 60 years. If they are tried as children and found guilty, they would likely be out by the time they were 25 years old. Denise, what should the judge do?
What we learned this week was just incredibly disturbing about these two young women. I just have to wonder, with the details that we learned about what happened and what they were doing, where were their parents in all of this? You know, it just boggles my mind that we had mutilation of dolls and all these drawings and all these other things, lists that girls were carrying around in their notebooks. Where were their parents during this whole process? You know, in some ways, I do not believe that either the mental health issues that they have or just this lack of parental attention. I'm not going to try to pretend that I know what it is that's caused them to behave this way, but they need some intensive treatment and some intensive help. I don't know that they can get that in the juvenile justice system. I don't. The criminal justice system, if they're tried as adults, does have the ability to charge them for up to, or to incarcerate them for up to 60 years. I mean, this is a serious, vicious crime, and I just do not believe necessarily that our juvenile justice system is able to offer the type of treatment and help that these girls need.
Kevin, I saw an interview with the parents of the girl who was stabbed, and they were asked by the correspondent a few months ago on ABC's 2020 program, do you want them tried as adults? And they said yes, because they were worried about their daughter, and they wanted their daughter to know that these people who attacked her, she would not see them again because they would be locked up.
I mean, when you look at, you have a 13-year-old girl and maybe an 11 or 12-year-old girl that perpetrated this heinous crime, and you say, well, that's too young. You can't try them as adults. But it's a different world we live in where, yes, people of that young, tender age are capable of brutal crimes that one would think that or only adults could pull off. I would try them as adults, because this crime again is so heinous, and if their defense is that they were insane at the time, well, I remember covering the Jeffrey Dahmer trial, and people thought, my goodness, he had to have been insane. His own attorney, Gerald Boyle, my good friend, argued that Jeffrey Dahmer took dead bodies into the shower with him. Well, of course, he had to be insane. Well, but he knew what he was doing, and these two young girls plotted this for month after month after month. So I think they should be tried as adults. I agree with the parents of the victim.
And you have argued repeatedly that there is no way a 12-year-old kid even has the brain of an adult and shouldn't be tried as an adult.
Absolutely not. You know, I'm glad you let me say a little bit. It is a horror. What they participated in was a horror. And there's no question about that. But when Denise says the juvenile justice system isn't prepared to deal with the problems these young girls have, let me tell you, the adult correctional system sure isn't. And because, among other things, they're not adults. They were 12 when they did this, and their brains weren't developed. And if you don't know all the weird ideas that children can have, then you don't know children, because they know very little. Their brains aren't even capable of acting like adult brains, okay? And they need intensive care and treatment. There's no question about that. But let me tell you, people talk like, well, if they can get out when they're 25, that's just not enough punishment for the horrible thing they did. Well, as a matter of fact, they probably won't get out when they're 25 because they need intensive care, and it is a mental issue. And even if they're 25, let me tell you, they are not going to be people unless they are are really so far into mental illness that they can't even participate in the world. They are not at 25 going to think you murder someone to appease Slender Man.
All right.
They need help.
Let's lighten things up for just a minute and let's talk sports. So Coach McCarthy's not going to call the plays for the Packers anymore. The Bucks do a huge trade, but still have Larry Sanders. The Brewers are about to start spring training, and the Badgers are one of the best basketball teams in the country. An exciting time for Wisconsin sports.
It is, and I want to add something to the whatever that you opened with. UWM's basketball team, men's basketball team, they were thought to have a season where they would totally fall apart, and they're playing close to 500 ball. In fact, they're one game under 500 in the league, and they're about 5 games currently under 500 overall. I think Rob Jeter's done a tremendous job in holding that team together. If they only had a few more games, I think they'd end the season at 500, given the play that they've currently had. They won almost all their games at home. Next season, they'll be off the watch list. They'll be able to play in tournaments, and I think you're going to see a hugely successful team. And I wish this community would get out and support them the way they support the other teams in the country.
Denise, if the Packers have done so well with McCarthy calling the plays, are you worried that now he says, I'm not going to call plays?
No, I'm not worried. I'm glad he's going to be able to pay some attention to the defense and special teams, which really, if we take a look at the last game we played, which, really should have been in the Super Bowl, but it wasn't. That's what fell apart. I mean, we just really need to be able to have the same kind of attention and success that he's been able to show, paying attention to the offense. He's got a great offensive team that's there now who will be able, I think, to do a great job of play calling. The place where we really need help, we talk about this all the time, is defense. So to be able to turn his attention to that, I think is a really a very positive sign. I think it's going to make for a better team.
Joel, are you excited about the Packer trade? Or, I mean, the Bucks trade?
Actually, when my grandson messaged me yesterday, they traded Brandon Knight. I was shocked, and I hated to lose him because he's so great.
Were you thinking,
and then when I found out
Larry Sanders?
Then when I found out we got last year's Rookie of the Year and some other good players and a good young team to continue to build on, they're making the right moves, and I hate losing Brandon Knight because I love to watch him, but boy, I think they're doing the right things, and they got a guy that's the next Jason Kidd, for Jason Kidd to coach. So I'm pretty happy.
Yeah. Kevin, Brewers spring training starts. Does it all depend on Ryan Braun?
And I have to end on a sour note.
Come on, Kevin.
No.
Come on.
You just have to say your annual, I think the Brewers are going to be horrible.
Oh, I don't say, no, come on, be fair. I never say
50-50
that.
at best.
I never say that, but come on. As Brewer fans, you have to be disappointed that we've done nothing in this offseason to improve a team that if they had just gotten a few more hits at the end of last year, would have been in the playoffs. We got
a new first baseman.
We've done, please, we've done zero. We got a pretty good starting rotation of pitching, all right? And if they stay healthy, that's great. But we need hitters. The hitting went south.
And we lost Ricky Weeks,
right.
who was a hitter.
Right. That's all right. But I don't know how you can say that in a really tough division that you're going to be better and have a solid shot at the playoffs when you had this epic collapse last year because of a lack of hitting, and you did nothing to take the termites out of the bat rack.
All right.
I'm sorry. I had to do it. I'm sorry.
We move on now. Economic conflict in the European Union, Russian moves in eastern Ukraine, new openings to Cuba, the rise of ISIS in the Middle East. They all form part of the backdrop for the next presidential campaign, which is, no surprise, already underway. So what qualities might be important or overrated in choosing the next leader of the free world? Rick Horowitz has been thinking about that. Rick.
Just to save time, here's what I'm not saying, okay? I'm not saying that having a college diploma proves that you're smart or makes you smart. I'm not saying that not having one means that you're stupid or uninformed. And I'm not saying that being smart or well-informed guarantees you'll be a successful president. Which brings us, of course, to that suddenly famous college dropout, Scott Walker. So 2 more things, just to be clear. I'm not saying that Scott Walker can't win the Republican nomination in 2016. I'm not even saying Scott Walker can't win the general election, just that he shouldn't. And not only because of his right-wing positions, let's call it affable extremism, on the things he does know about, but because of the many things he doesn't know anything about and shows no interest in knowing about. It's a complicated world out there, a dangerous world. You can't just talk about cheese, about standing up to the unions. Now, people are saying that his punting on that final softball question about evolution when he was in London last week, they're saying it made Scott Walker look ridiculous, cowardly. I say no. Scott Walker was looking ridiculous and cowardly long before they ever got to that evolution question. Or evolution question, as some of the Yahoo chorus have been pronouncing it, to poke fun at the event's BBC moderator. Because after all, nothing shows how worldly wise you are like mocking the way the English speak English, right? Anyway, I watched the entire live stream of the Chatham House event. Walker's short and virtually substance-free speech, except for cheese, of course, and then the 45 minutes of bobbing and weaving during the Q&A. Embarrassing. Accepting an invitation to speak at an international affairs think tank and then refusing to talk about international affairs? He claimed he was being polite, respectful, on foreign soil, don't you know? When it was as clear as the chimes of Big Ben that he had nothing to say, no knowledge, no insights worth sharing on the kinds of issues a president would have to tackle from day one. Look, nobody expected detailed 10-point plans, but some evidence that that he grasped even the fundamentals, that would have been reassuring. Not even close, and no sign it bothered him. Photo ops in front of 10 Downing Street won't cut it, or calling the Atlantic Ocean the pond. It's a complicated world out there, and Scott Walker simply isn't ready for prime time.
Well, thank you, Rick, and thank you so very much for joining us. Please stay warm and enjoy the rest of your weekend.